who will be leading the call today.
Thank you very much, Taryn. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. As Taryn said, this is our 7th call on COVID, and that doesn't mean that the crisis has lasted those 7 weeks. Unfortunately, the crisis has lasted longer, but each time we meet, the country seems to be closer and closer to opening up and going to a good place. To just emphasize Taryn's remarks, this is an open forum. We want to hear from everybody. It's basically put in place for you to ask questions and to give answers. The answers are as important as the questions because you're all out on the front lines and you're living in your plants every day with the challenges that state regulations bring, federal information brings, and the like. There's been a recurring theme that we did post this morning at the AICC website where we do a daily update. There's always been some questions about standardization of cleaning procedures. The CDC did issue guidance last week on what cleaning procedures should look like in the home, in schools, and in your businesses. So if you haven't looked at that today, I suggest you go there. It does answer some questions that have been raised in this forum in the past. And we'll keep putting information like that up on the website whenever it makes sense. We have a special treat for you today in that we have Adam Josephson, who we've promoted to the position of Chief Financial Analyst at KeyBank Capital Markets, to give us some insight as to what's going on in our industry, in the industry that our industry serves, in the several industries that our industry serves, and to share some insight on what he's hearing as he goes about his important business. So I want to turn the proceedings over to Adam Josephson of KeyBank Capital Markets. Adam.
Mike, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Let me share my screen. Okay. Oh, whoops. Hold on one second.
It's coming.
Sorry. 1 second. Is that? Sorry. Trying to. Hey, Mike.
Go to the slideshow icon and you're there.
Yeah, it's being obscured by 1 second. Sorry about that.
You can move the photos that are covering it over to the other side if you want.
There you go. Yep, thank you. Is this better?
Yep, perfect.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all Mike, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for my promotion. I really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure.
So I'll just spend about 10 minutes going through just the box market, mainly about demand, a little bit about supply at the end. I'm sure this it doesn't come as news to most of you, but figured I would just do a brief overview and hopefully it's helpful to some of you folks. So I'll start with box demand, just about 5-10 minutes on demand. So if this is slide 3 or whatever it is, you can see that since the turn of the century, it's been a flattish market. There have been fits and spurts. There have been some really good periods in the mid-2000s, and then really from 16 to 18, there was periods of good growth. You can see from 07 to 09, we had a deep downturn. And you can see overall, shipments have been just about flat from 2000. So there's a view among some that this has been a 1% to 2% growth market. It really hasn't been. I guess it depends on what time frame you're looking at, but it's been flat over the past 20 years or so. If you look on a per capita basis, it's actually been declining by about 1% a year. So it's clear that really all the growth has come from population growth, which used to be about a point a year. Now it's about a half point a year population growth. And as you can probably figure, what drives box demand, generally speaking, is population growth and increases in real disposable income. But what this chart shows you, this per capita chart, is that boxes really have had difficulty penetrating new markets over the past many years. So again, I present this chart because I think it comes as a surprise to some people. So what drives box demand? So it's been a flattish market, but it has clearly ups and downs. And what I tried to show here is that it's all driven by manufacturing. So if you see that the red circles, the chart on the left is blended average box shipments. The chart on the right is the ISM PMI. It's specifically the manufacturing PMI. What you can see is that when the PMI goes way down, box demand does exactly the same. And when the PMI is at or near 60, a box demand is growing robustly, as was the case in 2004, 2016, 2017, 2018. And if you think back to late 16, when we saw this surge, there was a lot of talk about e-commerce and, oh my God, we're in a new paradigm, it's e-commerce. But you look at the ISM PMI and that's really what's going on here. The ISM PMI started to surge in late 2016 as the US economy did much the same thing. And the economy was doing really, really well in late 16, throughout 2017, and then into early 2018 before it started to slow. And you saw that with the PMI. So changes in box demand tend to mirror changes in the ISM PMI. And this chart here shows exactly the same thing. The correlation's not 1, but it's 0.6, which is a pretty good correlation. And this more explicitly shows, the recessionary periods are in gray, and you can see what happens to box shipments when we go into a recession. It's quite clear. So now to today. So we all know about the panic buying that happened in March and that bled into April. So I just want to give a little colors to what's happening now. So this slide actually came from International Paper's first quarter earnings presentation yesterday. They give a really good presentation and just a lot of detail. So here they gave their 9 end markets. And you can see what those are. The 3 primary ones, as they characterize them, are food and beverage, other non-durables, and then basically durables. And you can see that when they talk about initial impact, that was related to COVID-19. This is all related to COVID-19. So you saw a big surge in demand for processed food, protein, paper towels, toilet paper, and obviously e-commerce. And then IP, if you look on the right, you can see the near-term outlook. And a lot of that green has turned into yellow and red. And that's because the panic buying has played out. And now it's, where do we go from here? That everyone's stocked up on toilet paper and wipes and Campbell's soup and many other things that they may never consume. And now what we're left with is just normal retail buying or normalizing retail buying at the same time as durable goods are way down and food service is way down and that sort of thing. So what IP said yesterday is that they do expect a near-term slowdown in demand, which I imagine doesn't come as a surprise to too many of you. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have seen the same trend in your business late in April and into May. And then back to this slide for a second, just to step back. So roughly 3/4 of the market is consumer non-durable and 25% durable. And so what I was telling you earlier is the durable piece is what really moves up and down. The 75% that's consumer non-durable is pretty steady Eddie. So, and box demand is pretty flat over time. So it's really that 25% durable piece that causes the gyrations up and down in box demand. And so here's more on that 25%. You can see what happened in March. Industrial production had been slowing over the past year, and obviously March took a dive for reasons you're all aware of. This is just more of the same. So this is the market manufacturing PMIs by country. There's a company called IHS Market that publishes these PMIs by country once a month. And the green is above 50. So above 50 indicates expansion. Red is below 50, that indicates contraction. And then obviously the yellow is the 50, that's just, that's flat. And you can see on the bottom, the PMI in expansion, and then the percentage. So when the going was reasonably good back in early 19, you could see that most countries were in expansion. And that started to slow, obviously, in May, and it just got worse and worse and worse toward the end of the year. There was a little bit of a pickup early this year, and you all know that box demand was pretty good in the first couple months of this year, and then obviously things started to fall off a cliff in March. You could see that only four countries, 4 of the top 25 countries were in expansion. And we've had, I don't know how many so far, about 10 report out of 25, and obviously none are expanding. So that tells you the situation that you're all quite familiar with. Besides durables, there's another piece of the box market that's been a kind of a big deal of late, which is the protein market. That's about 10% of US box demand, and protein is normally a pretty steady market. Recently, it's been anything but that. A number of slaughterhouses have been forced to shut because they've had cases and in some cases deaths. Obviously, on Tuesday, the president put out an order that basically gave cover for the processors to open these plants again, but time will tell how quickly they're able to do so, because part of the problem is absenteeism, and an order from the president doesn't necessarily fix the problem, which is partly absenteeism. Some people just don't want to go to work because they're scared to do so for perhaps obvious reasons. So that's the situation in a great deal of flux right now. It should get better. In other words, these declines that you're seeing should become less pronounced as more people go back to the plants, but it's very much in flux at the moment. And as I said, protein's about 10% of box demand. And so I told you 75% of the market is consumer non-durable, and protein is 10% of that 75%. And so that's been hit pretty hard very recently, but hopefully that will get better reasonably soon. And then, so protein is 10% of that 75%, that's consumer non-durables. CPGs are a big piece of that, consumer packaged goods. And this is just some quotes we took from some recent first quarter earnings calls, just from executives from Kraft Heinz, Kellogg, Coca-Cola, basically saying, yeah, we had this pantry stuffing in March, but that's going to slow. And then some of these same companies have large food service businesses, which have obviously taken a huge hit. And obviously everyone's hoping that food service will get better over the next few months as people start getting out again and going back to work. Obviously that's everyone's hope, but obviously it's a situation, a great deal of flux. So we shall see what happens there. And I just wanted to have a couple slides on supply. I figured some of you may want to get an update on supply, just because that always comes up. So this is just a summary of what's been happening recently, what's been announced, and any closures have been announced so far. So we're all aware of all the supply that's been announced. I've left a couple off of here. So I've left Crossroads and Core Ventures off of here because I have doubts as to whether those projects will come to fruition. In the last week or so, Graphic Packaging and Sunoco both announced closures. Sunoco's medium, Graphic is medium and liner. So those are primarily boxboard producers that chose to get out of the containerboard market for reasons I can go into later if you want. But basically, this is my updated capacity addition summary here, and that's about 2.3 million tons that we have being added over that 4-year period. And then on a percentage basis, this may help you a bit. So what we've done here is just compare annual US containerboard production, which is a proxy for demand. Now, production is both domestic and export. So it's not only domestic demand, but also export demand. That's containerboard production. And then change in capacity is self-explanatory. So this is what's happened over the past 8 years, and then we've added it all up. You can see from 12 to 19, what you can see is that capacity is up by 12% over that period, and production / demand is up about 8. So capacity has outgrown a demand by a little less than a point a year. And then to the right of that is our estimate for capacity growth over the next 3 years. So we have it up about 2.5% this year, and then about 1% in both 21 and 22. And the obvious question is, well, what will demand grow by over that 3-year period compared to our estimated supply growth of about 1.5% a year? I think that covers it. So let me stop sharing. Can you guys see me okay?
We can. Thank you, Adam.
Yes,
Wonderful.
thank you, Adam.
So just as a reminder, if you have questions, you can go ahead and click on the chat icon and post your question in the chat box. If you have responses, you can raise your hand. Steve will be reading the questions out, or we might call on you to ask the question. If you're on a phone and want to raise your hand, you can press *9, and we can unmute you and you can ask a question there as well. Steve?
Yep, thank you, Taryn. Thanks, Adam. The first question to come up is, I put it into the text box there. Do you see you think manufacturing will be coming back to North America, as specifically USA, as a result of the COVID crisis?
Over time, it should, you would think, to some extent. Can you see me okay, by the way?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So one would think there would be some migration back to the US, just given what's happened, that obviously we've become much too reliant on some other countries for pharmaceuticals and otherwise that are critical to the country. So one would expect to see some of that, Steve, but as to how quickly that will happen and by what order of magnitude, I really haven't the foggiest. So it's so hard to know, and that's one of so many variables that I wouldn't necessarily overemphasize that, because even if it happens, I would think it would happen quite gradually.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, hold on here. About 5 of them just popped in at once here. Okay, do you see the acceleration in e-commerce business brought on by the pandemic maintaining its momentum after the pandemic?
I would think not quite the momentum that we've seen in March and April. The e-commerce growth has been extraordinary during this crisis for obvious reasons. So presumably, as the economy returns to something more resembling normalcy, then that growth would subside to some extent. So I would expect it'll still remain quite high, but not nearly the level that we've seen since we've all literally been stuck at home for the last 2 months. So could there be some structural boost from that part of the market? Absolutely. I mean, we all guess as to precisely what percentage of the market it is. Most guesses range from 10 to 15, Steve. So yeah, it's reasonable to think that growth will remain quite robust. But but you wouldn't expect anything remotely comparable to what we've seen in March and into April for likely obvious reasons.
In your view, how strong will our economic recovery be, and over what time frame?
Gosh, I'm no economist. I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but I'm nonetheless not an economist. I would think it would be quite gradual. I mean, we're going through so much pain at the moment, and obviously the government is doing everything it can to limit the pain that we're experiencing, but there's no easy fix to this. God willing, there will be a vaccine over the next year, but there's clearly no easy fix to this whatsoever. And this is not just a domestic situation. This is a global situation. And obviously the US economy is heavily reliant on what happens elsewhere. And obviously we're racking up a great deal of debt in trying to fix this problem. And the more debt we rack up, the more limited our growth will be over the years to come. It's just simple math. So I would think it would be a very gradual recovery. That's just best guess.
With regard to capacity, and I believe this means containerboard capacity, what do you think the worldwide capacity issue will mean to domestic pricing?
Say that one more time, Steve. Sorry.
Well, I'm going to infer that this capacity question refers to containerboard capacity. What will the worldwide capacity issue mean to domestic pricing?
Well, it's to the extent global demand remains subdued for a while as we go through this, and I think everyone has reason to think that demand will remain subdued for some time, then it will mean nothing good for domestic pricing. There has been an imbalance between global supply and demand over the past, call it, year and a half, which is reflected in what's happened to US export prices over that period. They've plummeted, and prices in China have gone way down, prices in Europe have gone way down. So you've seen it everywhere. So the question is, will the next year and a half be any different? And we're in a global recession. That's never been a good thing for demand. As you said, there's a significant amount of supply that is scheduled to be added in the US, Europe, Brazil, China, Russia. So it's entirely possible, if not likely, that there will be an oversupply situation for the next year plus. And obviously oversupply situations are never good for domestic pricing.
Steve? Okay, we got to shift some gears. I think unless there are more, unless you have hands raised, Taryn, on economic questions for Adam, we've got a couple of others with regard to testing.
Nope, no hands raised right now.
Okay, well, we'll don't go away, Adam.
Adam's going to stick around.
So here's a question. Are any plants requiring that all employees be tested for COVID-19? And this questioner says there has been a case at another plant in our city, and wanted to confirm if this was recommended or if others have any thoughts. Any comments from members?
Please use the participant icon to raise your hand so I can call on you, or I'll just call on you. Donna, did you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay. No one responding.
I think from past conference calls, it's been, or video conferences, it's been that, if someone had tested positive, basically they tried to do, limit contact within the plant or isolate the shift. But I don't know about requiring all employees to be tested.
I'm unmuting. I think this is
John. There's
John.
the opportunity for contact tracing in a plant environment, because by and large, who's in the plant at what time, on what shift, et cetera, and certainly on what workstation the infected employee was working on. So minimally, I would think that plants are following contact tracing to make sure that they can at least identify those potentially in contact with versus those that weren't. And that would probably rule over testing or all employees over and above what you may be doing now in terms of taking temperatures or doing something else.
I'm unmuting. I think this is John Cochi.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So we talked about doing specifically the antibody testing, and that's not reliable enough right now. We also ran it past our council, and they thought that it was not a good idea, A, because it's not reliable, and B, somebody could test negative and then get it a day or two later. So, and the tests aren't really that available. So we're not doing that right now. I think they're going to start to make it mandatory for all frontline workers, but right now we decided because of those reasons we're not going to do any of that.
Okay. Steve?
Hey, John, you're since you're live right now, you asked a question earlier about PPP money. Is anyone returning the money because of new rules about ability to secure funding and the high dollar amount of the loan? You want to clarify?
Yeah, I can tell you that our loan was over the number Mnuchin talked about, and we are very concerned about it. Matter of fact, I would say that 99% we're going to return that money because they basically changed the goalposts and said if you are able to get your own financing, which we certainly did early on, that you're in scrutiny, and if you're over $2 million, then you're going to get looked at. So the final decision will be made today at 4:00, but we're kind of leaning towards giving that money back, which sucks because other decisions are going to have to be made and accelerated. So the whole spirit of the thing was to keep people employed. So I got to believe that I think we're about 30 million people unemployed right now. I got to believe it's going to 40, 45 million because everybody's going to be in the same boat we are, at least anybody that's a bigger company. So I just wanted to know if anybody else is thinking about that or what they've done, or they had any different counsel.
Anybody? Please raise your hand.
While people are in the process of raising their hand to respond to John, I will point out that the AICC survey of general members and associate members had a question about government programs, including PPP. And if I recall, I don't have it open in front of me, 51 of, not all the respondents answered the question, but 51 people did. And the majority of those had received either a PPP loan approval and the funds, or a PPP loan approval and they were awaiting funds. So they may not be on the call here, but there should be a pool of data available from AICC members regarding John's question.
I'm going to call on Susie Cummins. She can, if she can respond. She posted in the box. Susie, I'm going to unmute you. Can you share what you were saying?
Yeah, we're also concerned about the amount, and we are constantly monitoring all the requirements against our payroll, and we determined that with that 75% threshold, we have a little bit too much. So we're going to return a portion of it. We're not returning it all, but we just want to keep within the right guidelines. We'll probably get audited. And so one of our questions that came up today was about this period of time that we have to compare our payrolls to, the two date scenarios they gave versus the 8 weeks we're in right now. We're questioning that because it's not just one criteria, it's all those criteria that we have to meet. And actually, we haven't found a definitive list of all the criteria we have to meet. It feels like it's changing all the time. But at this point, we are going to return a small portion.
Thank you,
just to be so that we're safe.
Thank you, Susie. Steve?
I don't have any more. There aren't any more questions here. Just there's some comments here about various governors and their dictatorial policies. That's an editorial comment as to being open. The state's open. Here's one. We'd like to know everyone's emotional or mental state. As business owners, many are used to fixing problems. We're now involved in a problem that is beyond our control and fix. How do you feel? Lost, dependent, frustrated, etc.? What keeps you moving forward? It's a good question.
Okay, who can I call on? Nobody has any feelings about this? I'm going to call on Bob Cohen.
Okay. I think it was Joe Palmari who talked about being aggressive coming out of the COVID crisis, and rather than feeling down in the dumps or feeling put upon, I think our whole philosophy, our whole corporate philosophy, our executive team philosophy, is to come out of this as aggressively as possible, come out as strong as possible. So I'm not going to be in a touchy-feely mood of being sorry for myself or sorry for anybody else. I think we're going to try to do the best we can coming out of this, and I think we already are.
Thank you. Joe, can I call on you?
You can, Taryn, and I feel fine. Thanks for asking, everybody. To Bob's point, plan on coming out aggressive. I mean, morale is good. It's an opportunity to reset, position yourself. It's the hand we've been dealt, so we have to deal with it right now, and we're dealing with it. And I certainly agree with Adam. I don't think we're going to rock it out. I think it's going to be a gradual build-up, but plan on positioning ourselves to come out as quickly as we can.
Thank you. John Pettingill, can I call on you? I can hear you.
Can you? Okay.
Mhm.
This is probably a little bit off subject, but I was in the chat thing here with the folks from Maine who drove 2 hours to go out to eat lunch because their governor had shut the state down. And I responded, which is probably what Steve was talking about, a few editorial comments about our governors. It's really, I guess, from a feeling standpoint, the anxiety that we have is we just don't know how long this will go on. And the political situation, at least in Michigan, is such that the two parties are kind of fighting with each other. And I truly believe the governor's on a little bit of a power trip. We really need to get the automobile guys started again. They expect to start working on that on the 18th of May. We remain, somewhat busy, so that makes me feel good. But it's a very anxious time. This is much different than 9/11 or the Iraq War or the major recession. This has happened so quickly. I think everybody's doing a really good job getting their arms around it. I mean, look at us here. I mean, this is really great. So, I mean, I think some good things are happening, but wow, it's still kind of an anxious period.
Thank you, John. We have a raised hand. I'm going to unmute James Beneroff, or actually, I think you are already unmuted, James.
Yeah, just totally anecdotal for what it's worth and totally personal. I have a sister who was a nurse for 20 years, master's in public health, retired from that and went into a completely different business. Just went back a couple of weeks ago because she couldn't run her non-medical business to work with a hospital, a local hospital here. And she just at the end of the day, she says, you never want to see a hospital. It's a war zone. Just hope we get this right and it's done. And that's all I could say is keep up the hope. But she says it's very depressing when you go into a hospital and you see it.
Thank you, James. Steve?
As states loosen restrictions, how are members addressing face-to-face sales calls getting back in gear?
Selfless plug. There's a whole virtual sales training webinar series coming up starting next week. You can see the dates on our calendar. Anybody having success doing anything different as it relates to sales calls? There we go, 267. That's James Kochi. John, got your name wrong, but you're unmuted.
I mean, we're actually thinking we're probably going to start filtering people back to, but I would imagine by the week after. And I think other people are probably going to follow that. We are still going in. We do vendor managed inventories in certain accounts, and we are still able to do that. And we are also bringing back more contractors, and we put a total kibosh on that. But we're doing that, temperature checks, proper PPE, the questionnaires about where they've been. So we're doing more of that, and I would imagine that we'll see that with our clients sometime soon. The other thing that we're looking at doing is there's a local comedian in our area that we're friendly with, and we're going to probably do a happy hour with him to do a half-an-hour comedy show, but also have a message to our clients and our prospects and some first responders. So, you know, to just try and keep in front of people with something other than the stuff they've been bombarded with, give them a little bit of happiness and joy for a little while, and just, you know, do those types of things.
Thank you, John. Steve?
This is about employee temperature taking. Is anyone applying any COVID technology outside of temperature taking, such as tracing badges? Is anyone applying any COVID technology outside of temperature taking, such as tracing badges? Not sure what that means, but Steve Lehman, you're asking that one. You want to elaborate?
Hold on. You unmute Steve. There you go.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. There's a company out of Michigan. That is making badges that if you're within close proximity to another employee, it'll go from green to red. But also, it's software. It's tracking, so you can see problems within your company. You can see that employee A came in close contact with employee B 6 times during the day. And you can just talk to them about, you know, why are you getting within 6 feet social distance, and solve the problem, or just, you know, it might be a disciplinary need. But that's technology that I'm interested in because I think social distancing is the primary way that I'll keep COVID out of my plant.
If Greg Tucker, I see Greg Tucker's on. Greg Tucker, I'm going to unmute you. If you're the expert on all this kind of stuff, so I'm going to see if you have any response that you can. Oh, I can't unmute you. You have to unmute yourself. Is Greg around? No, he's not.
In People's Republic of California, really, I'm quite concerned about any kind of badging, testing, prodding, poking. The lawyers are lining up in droves, really just sue the living hell out of all of us. So go ahead, test, prod, poke, and badge up everybody, but you're gonna be looking at lawsuits up the wazoo. We're in a new paradigm here in California, also in Illinois, and I think in Connecticut, where personal HIPAA compliance is going to be a very fun topic of lawyers reaching the new pandemic we're working in. I have no faith in our government, and I have no faith in being protected by this. So we're kind of backing off on these things. We're still taking temperatures, but we're not touching anybody. We're not branding anybody. We're not segregating anybody that may have some. If you do show up and you got a temperature and you're sneezing, we're sending you home because you're paid well for it. But branding, poking, prodding, I wouldn't recommend it, not in the People's Republic of California. And Illinois and Connecticut.
Somebody on the chat says, "Don't forget Massachusetts."
Okay, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Greg. Steve?
Is anyone in warmer climate currently requiring all workers to wear masks? And if you are, have there been any concerns with temperatures in the plant and breathing restrictions?
And while we're waiting for responses to that, I'm going to call on Bob Cohen, who has his hand raised. Bob?
Yeah, I think what Greg said is absolutely true. We've been talking to our attorneys about the possible antibodies that John mentioned earlier. It was just a way of trying to understand, you know, what our exposure was. But I will tell you that you've got privacy issues, you've got HIPAA issues, you've got ADA issues. And I'm very, very concerned with the lawsuits, not only in California and in Illinois, but anywhere. Pennsylvania, particularly New Jersey and New York, would be tough places for those privacy concerns. So yeah, I reiterate what he said. I think you've got to be very careful. And if you try to do tracing, you're really on the borderline of privacy issues.
Thank you, Bob. Steve?
I want to go back to the previous question. Has anybody in warmer climates had any issues with requiring workers to wear masks and temperatures in the plant making it difficult for people to breathe?
Mm.
So all you in the South.
Jean Marino?
We don't have any mandatory requirements yet. We do have employees still wearing them, but it's definitely something that's going to grow in concern. You know, one of the guys in my AICC advisory group, this is a plug for anybody who's not in an advisory group. I strongly recommend it. Through this pandemic, I've had kind of a de facto group across the country of folks that I do not compete with, that I can bounce questions off of. And one in particular is masks are required if you're traveling within the plant and you're going to kind of come inside of somebody's 6 foot social distance. But if you're at your workstation, you don't have to wear one. So we're not yet as mandatory, but the question is a good one. It's going to get pretty hot pretty soon.
Thank you, Jean. If anybody wants to find out more about CEO advisory groups that Jean was mentioning, please send me a note and I can send you information on those programs that are always forming. Bob Wonderluck, you had your hand raised, but I don't see it anymore. Are you on? Rob Wonderluck, I'm sorry. Can I unmute you? You had your hand raised?
Hey, everybody. I had the same discussion with my group, and I had responded to Kristen Haglund privately on her question that Steve read out. But my point in previous discussions is that if you're feeding a high-speed flexo with a mask on, you're going to be, you know, and if you have an employee who has asthma or something like that, you're going to be looking at an incident. It's just not feasible. It's an aerobic activity. The masks that are worth anything or compliant are going to be too restrictive. It's an aerobic activity when you're feeding a high-speed flexo.
Thank you, Rob. Steve?
There have been several comments to that, to the mask question in the chat box here. Chase Haddon, down in Georgia, they're not requiring their staff to wear masks, and it really hasn't been that hot down there. Gary Cook, I have been able to visit some plants, but only when needed, wearing masks when asked, etc.
Jean Marino, you have a comment?
Yeah, for those of you that were on this call last week, I think, or actually no, it was Dave Goach talked about the criteria dynamics behind masks versus face coverings. I think we're using that interchangeably. I think that Zoom call is probably recorded on AICC's site, but David talked about the 5 criteria. Snugly but comfortably, secured with ties or ear loops, contains multi-layers of fabric, allows for breathing without restriction, which addresses Rob's question about that aerobic activity, and can be laundered and not changed or altered. I'm probably misspeaking in that our optional folks are wearing face coverings and not necessarily face masks. We don't have anyone wearing healthcare approved N95 masks or anything like that.
Thank you, Jean. And we have a quick raised hand from Joe Palmieri.
Yeah, just a comment on the masks. And in Ohio, they're starting to relax some things today. You know, effective today, non-essential surgeries and procedures are starting back up, including dental. On Monday, May 4th, manufacturing, distribution, and construction for all non-essential is reopening. One of the things they are doing is all businesses must require all employees to wear facial coverings, whether you had been open or just opening back up. Now, Ohio is doing 6 exceptions. It's prohibited by law or regulation. It violates a document industry standard. It's not advisable for health reasons. It violates the individual company's safety policy. You're segregated into your own individual office. Or in the last one, there's functional or practical reasons why you shouldn't have it. You could certainly make that argument if the other states follow suit, if it's 110 in the plan in Georgia, that it's just not practical. So there's a little wiggle room to let employers kind of navigate the water to see what's correct. Yeah, we're mandating it with a couple of minor exceptions. One is the medical one, but then you'll need medical documentation for that.
Thank you, Joe. James Benaref?
Yeah, as far as the tracing/tracking, there's kind of 2 parts to it. One is the 6-foot thing, the social distancing, where one can, put tape on the floor, or wear those Samsung watches that if 2 people are closer than 6 foot, there's an alarm. There's also the tracking through cell phones, and you're going to start to see more of that, because that's where you've been, where are you, and I think that's an important thing for AICC to look at. I don't know if anybody saw the 60 Minutes episode on it last week, but it's fascinating what may start to happen, which is people downloading an app, and you can verify where you've been and who you've been in contact with. And that's got privacy issues, obviously.
Thank you, James. Steve?
Here's a sales-related question. Most box plants do business across state lines. Is there any special preparation that needs to be done to serve a reopened state from a still closed state, or vice versa?
Anybody have a response? Please raise your hand. Nope.
Don't see any?
No.
Mike, you posted that question, I believe. Maybe it was from someone else.
Someone wanted to remain anonymous, but yeah. So I don't have any more background on it than that.
Okay. Here's another question regarding testing. Has anyone found testing facilities for employees looking to return to work that have no symptoms, but may have been in contact with someone who has tested positive? Has anyone found testing facilities for employees looking to return to work that have no symptoms, but have been in close contact with someone who has tested positive?
Jean Marino.
We had that on 3 occasions, Steve. We had 3 different employees who got phone calls from relatives. We're with friends, and the friend's relative said, hey, you were with me last week. I just tested positive. You should go get tested. We got tested at the county level, and they all came back negative. But this was kind of early on, so the amount of time it was taking to get the results back actually fed into a 14-day self-quarantine. So it was taking about 10 to 11 days to get the results. And at that point, it would almost be midweek. And we'd say, just come back on Monday, and it would fulfill the 14-day timeline. But that happened in 3 cases. And in all 3 cases, we had negative results.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
Here's one for Adam. Adam, this person wants to hear your thoughts on what you might see on the subject of bankruptcies coming on, not just box makers, but with customers, especially those in tourism, travel, entertainment, food service suppliers.
That's getting a little outside my bailiwick. I'm not, as I said earlier, I'm not an economist. I just try to analyze paper and packaging companies. So I'd be getting a little over my skis if I started opining on likelihood of bankruptcies. So if you don't mind, I'll take a pass on that one.
Taryn, I don't know if Mitch Klinger's on the call at all. Maybe if he is, maybe he could give his opinion.
I don't know. He's not on. Nope. Any other questions?
I think we recovered. Hold on. A lot of good comments here. Some are very entertaining. Derek Volk writes that summer's very nice in Maine. Last year it happened on a Wednesday. So I refer to you all to the comments. You might find some good messages there.
Aaron, it might be a good time for us to take our poll in terms, for everyone that's on this video conference. We'd like to raise a poll question for you in terms of the frequency with which this conference will continue. So Taryn, can you put that up? Everybody will be able to vote right on your screen. It'll be nice and easy. And we'll just give you a moment to do that. While I promote the next, we're going to have a speaker, a webinar replacing this video conference 2 weeks from today. That would be on Friday, May 15th. We're going to have Gene Marks, and that name may sound familiar to you. Gene has spoken at several AICC regional summits as well as several AICC national meetings. He's a columnist, a commentator, an author, and a small business owner. And his webinar topic is going to be Beyond the Pandemic, Preparing Your Business for the Not So Distant Future. So we think a couple of weeks from now, it's going to be a very timely topic for folks. So I want you to keep that in mind while you're voting. We'll be doing that 2 weeks from now. And having it 2 weeks from now is not trying to lead you in any way, shape, or form in a direction of your answers relative to the voting. Just working out that way from a scheduling point of view.
So it's 67% yes, 19% no, and as needed is 14%.
Okay, well, we'll continue to monitor that, see what else comes up. But if that holds true to form, we'll probably take a pass next week, come back with Gene Marks on the 15th, and then proceed every other week thereafter.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. How has everyone's shipping departments handled closed customers? Have you had CSRs reach out to customers to get better insight into each customer's closings, et cetera? Is there anyone that wants to take that question? Steve, do you see any others?
Yeah, there was a comment there to Zach's question.
I'm going to unmute John Cochi. You had a comment?
Oh, just on that shipping thing. I mean, we've been tracking since day one any companies that close and the length of the close, and it's been pretty static at around 10% of our clients at any one time. So someone goes on, someone goes off. So you just have to call me. You know, we're asking, our shipping people get a lot of good information, but sometimes it's not accurate. And then we have the salesperson call up their contact and they get all kinds of information. So that's what we've been doing, but it's been pretty steady, you know, at about 10% of our client base.
Thank you, John. Steve, do you have anything else?
Yeah, just a question on with all the with the level of federal spending related to the crisis, what are there long-term concerns regarding inflation or the value of the dollar?
For me?
Yeah. Go for it, Adam.
We made you a chief financial analyst, you know?
Well, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yes. It's like, can you hear me now?
Eventually, the likely answer is yes, but every central bank is doing the same thing. And currencies are a relative game. So as much as the Federal Reserve is printing, the ECB, the BOJ, everyone else is doing the exact same thing. In times of crisis, the dollar actually holds its value extremely well because there's a flight to safety, but eventually, yeah, that becomes a concern. And then, which is why if you look at the prices of assets such as gold, Bitcoin, et cetera, they're going up quite considerably because I think some people are starting to get concerned about that very issue.
Thank you. Steve?
I don't see any more new questions yet.
Okay, well, it's kind of right on time. It's 2:56. Mike, do you want to close out?
So we'll head into the home stretch. I want to thank Adam Josephson for taking time out and sharing his insight with us. We appreciate it very much. Taryn, Steve, Virginia, thank you so much for flying the controls. And thank you, questioners, answerers, and our members for being there for each other and certainly being there for the country and your communities. I think that you all have done a great job through this, and I think you'll continue to do so. AICC will continue to stand with you, and we wish you all a good weekend and a healthy weekend. And take a look at the AICC calendar. We have 9 webinars, 10 if you include Gene Marks in 2 weeks, scheduled between now and June 2nd on a variety of topics, most of them dealing with how to cope in a more socially distanced environment. So I think there's a lot of value there for you as well. And we'll continue to do our best to continue to provide value. Have a great weekend, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.